Anyone who has ever tasted pancakes smothered in real maple syrup knows what a special treat it is.
I like to eat maple syrup pancakes and waffles.
I like to eat it on ice cream.
That sweetness with a zing taste is special because it comes from the sugar maple tree, a tree that is unique in the plant kingdom in its ability to produce large amounts of sugary sap from which maple syrup, spreads, and candies are made. The process starts during summer when photosynthesis in the large green leaves produces sugar that is stored in the roots. The sugar is used for growth and moves throughout the tree in a watery solution known as sap. Maples are the first trees to have sap start flowing in the spring, when there is still snow on the ground and freezing temperatures at night. Hard maples, the sugar and black maples that have the highest content of sugar, are found only in the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada. It is from this region alone that all of the world's supply of maple syrup is produced.
I have my own tree out in the yard, in the front yard, and I bring buckets and then dump it in the refrigerator.
I've been doing this since I was a little kid, going around in the sap gather and just a little bucket, going to get some sap, Most of the time I just watch. As I got bigger, I started carrying full pails and getting muscular. And then kind of switched over to tubing, so I did all that. And as I got where I am now, I'm doing the full syrup process, drawing off, and making the real thing.
We kids are the first generation making maple syrup back in these woods, and I hope that we will keep making maple syrup for another couple of generations.
No one knows who first discovered maple syrup or sugar, because by the time European settlers had arrived and began to record the history of the New World, the Native American tribes they encountered had already been making it so long that they had made up myths about its origins.
My favorite Indian story is about these people that would lay around on the ground and syrup would drip into their mouths from the trees, and one day one of the gods thought that they were too lazy, so he poured water on the trees and watered the trees down. And from now on they had to make their own syrup because otherwise they'd just get this watery sap.
An Indian named Wilkes threw his tomahawk into a maple tree, and he pulled it out, and sap came out. And then his wife got a bowl, and she put under the place where it was dripping, and then it got full, and then she put in his venison stew, and Wilkes said it tasted sweet, and it was sweet because it was maple syrup.
The Native Americans taught the settlers the basic process of making maple sugar, which remains unchanged today. Gather the sap, then boil it to evaporate the water and concentrate the sugar. The Indians used hollowed-out logs to hold the sap and added heated rocks to keep it boiling. The settlers used iron kettles over an open fire, which made the process much easier. Because it was hard to store liquid syrup, Indians boiled it down to sugar and put it in birch bark containers called mokuks.
I like to eat maple syrup on my French toast, and I like to eat the cream.
Although the equipment used in making maple has improved over time, the steps in the process have not changed. First, the sap must be gathered from the tree. When freezing nights are followed by warm days, that freeze-thaw process creates pressure inside the maple tree. As the tree warms up, the sap thaws and carbon dioxide gas is produced in the sapwood, causing enough pressure to force the sap out of the tree.
I like to help my dad tap the tree.
Traditionally, a small hole is drilled in the tree and a spout or spile is tapped into the hole to direct the flow of sap. Then a bucket is hung on the spile to hold the sap until it can be collected and taken to the sugar house. Each tap will yield from 1/4 to 2 gallons of sap or more during a day's run. That is, until it freezes again or stays warm for too long and the pressure within the tree subsides. Longtime sugar maker Gerald Lundstrom tells us about the process and the length of the season.
To make maple syrup, you gotta have some maple trees. And you gotta have some equipment and buckets. The season usually starts around the first week of March and usually runs for about 4 weeks. Of course, extremes make averages. And this is one extreme this year. Here we are the 24th of February, and it should have been tapped a month ago, and it looks like we could be very near being done. I remember one year we didn't tap until the 27th of March and still had a good season. So you cannot predict what's going to happen. You have to. If people ask me what kind of season we're going to have, I tell them, well, ask me about the middle of April, and I'll tell you all about it.
Some sugar makers still use horses to pull a large gathering tank through the woods and collect the sap from the buckets. Chris Wenger has been doing it that way for many years.
Well, working with horses is a pleasure to anyone that enjoys horses. And I've enjoyed it all my life. I know a lot of other people do it. In fact, some of the people that are out here today helping us are here just because they like to be with the horses. This woods has got a lot of hills in it to begin with. The horses work well in here. We can get up and down the hills real well without getting stuck. We don't tear the woods up, which the tractors used to tear it all to pieces. And we don't have to get off and on every time to go ahead. They can do that by themselves. And if you're short of help, it really helps. We just all enjoy being with the horses. We like the quietness. The only thing we hear is the jingle of the tugs. That's what we enjoy out here.
Other sugar makers use trucks or tractors if the terrain and snow cover allow. Because the collecting of sap from buckets can be so labor-intensive, many producers, especially the bigger ones, now use plastic tubing to transport the sap. Small tubes from each tap hole run into larger main lines, like streams to a river. A vacuum pump is often added to increase sap flow. The tubing carries the sap to a central collection tank or directly to the sugar house. Once the sap has been collected, the evaporation process begins right away. The small producer or hobbyist may use the old batch method, where sap is added to the evaporating pan until a small amount of syrup has been made. Then the batch is poured out and the process is started all over again. In bigger operations, the sap is taken to holding tanks that feed large evaporators in a continuous process. The sap enters the pan at the back and gets thicker and thicker as it winds through the partitions in first the back or flue pan and then the front or syrup pan.
Well, the sap comes in here and into this float box, and the float controls the level. As it evaporates away, it feeds more sap in, so it maintains a constant level all the time. And it comes into that far side of the flue pan, goes through that cutout over into this side, then through these pipes into the front pan, back and forth through these compartments till it gets to the other side, and that's where it's finished off.
Knowing when the sap is condensed enough to become syrup is part of the art and science of making maple syrup. An experienced sugar maker keeps a watchful eye on the size and color of the bubbles in the front pan. Old-timers use the apron test to see when it was just thick enough. As maple sap becomes thicker or more concentrated, it boils at a higher and higher temperature. Sap becomes syrup when its temperature reaches 7 degrees above the boiling point of water. The sugar maker recalibrates the thermometer each day to make sure it's right.